My hope is that the Attorney General and the President decide to change their mind. But if they don't, we will provide the security that will keep everybody safe.
That was New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg backing off his initial support for holding the terror trial of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other September 11th conspirators in Lower Manhattan. A political backlash has been growing among Republicans and an increasing number of Democrats since Attorney General Eric Holder announced the decision late last year. And there was word late this week that President Obama has asked Holder to look for alternative locations. This week, New York Congressman Peter King introduced a bill that would prohibit the use of Justice Department funds to try the detainees in federal civilian courts. Mr. King is the ranking Republican on the House Committee on Homeland Security. He joins me now. Congressman, welcome.
Thank you, Paul.
So we got word that the White House is reconsidering holding this trial in Manhattan. How do you explain the reversal?
I think the most honest appraisal is they read the election results in Massachusetts. Scott Brown's own polling showed that over 70% of people in Massachusetts were opposed to trials being held in the United States, to have these terrorist trials being held in civilian courts. And that, plus the Detroit bombing on Christmas Day, which the administration totally mishandled and has continued to mishandle. I think the Democrats in the Congress genuinely getting nervous. Listen, I thought from day one, I said this was the most irresponsible decision any president ever made to hold these trials in New York City. Democrats were lined up behind the president almost 100%. It's only in the last week to 2 weeks that they've started to really feel the heat and they've started to read the political tea leaves. So, whatever the reason is, I'm glad it's coming out of New York, but I don't think it should be in any civilian court anywhere in the United States.
Well, but that's a question I want to ask, because the president, the White House spokesman, has let it be known that they still want this to be a civilian terror trial, maybe not in Manhattan with the mayor opposed to it and some of the Democratic senators, but maybe somewhere else. And you're saying, no way, you don't want them to be tried as civilians at all.
I think it's wrong as a matter of policy. I think it's wrong as a matter of law. But also, I just think it's unfair to impose this burden on any community. I mean, the terror threats that will accompany these trials are almost impossible to gauge. That wherever the trial is held will end up becoming the main terrorist target in the world. To impose that on a community is totally irresponsible when we have the mechanism in place to try them in a military tribunal, either in a military base in the United States in some remote area, or I believe, try them in Guantanamo, which is where they really belong. Well,
you have introduced a bill to cut off funds for these civilian trials. Lindsey Graham, Senator Republican from South Carolina, had an amendment on precisely that in the past. It got fewer than 50 votes. Do you have any Democrats who are joining you in your effort?
Yes, there's a number of Democrats, and that bill that went down, the amendment by Senator Graham, that went down in November, I believe. The political climate has changed dramatically since then. In those days, the Democrats, whether at the national level or in New York City, were marching in lockstep with the president and with the Attorney General. Things have changed dramatically since then. I have no doubt that if Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, certainly Nancy Pelosi in the House, allows this to come to a vote, it will pass overwhelmingly, probably every Republican and a large number of Democrats.
How do you respond to the charge that some would make that this would be an unconstitutional infringement on the president's war powers, because he has the right under the Constitution to name enemy combatants, and he needs to be able to decide where and when to try these. Congress can't cut off funds.
It's really ironic for a president who has been so reluctant to use the term war, and an administration which has been so reluctant to use the word terrorism, that they would be trying to invoke war powers to justify this policy. I believe that's a debate worth having. I believe that when it involves, if it's overseas, that's one thing. But if we're talking about imposing this type of risk on local governments, on the people of this country, then I believe that Congress has the right to speak up and be heard, the same as it would on a declaration of war.
So it's basically the Congress's power of the purse, you think, gives you the right to do that?
Yeah, I think the power of the purse supersedes the power of the president in that regard. Even the president's ability to wage war, if Congress cut off funding, he couldn't do it.
So you would say that Democrats could have cut off funding for Iraq if they had had the votes to do it?
And they certainly tried. We had a number of votes where they were trying to cut off funding, and we defeated them. And So yes, I think they have the right. It's an extreme right to use, but I think in a case such as this, especially where it involves using civilian courts on American territory, that Congress has the right to assert itself.
All right, let me shift briefly here to the Christmas bomber. What has the White House told you about the interrogation of Abdul Muttalib, which was only 50 minutes, and the decision to Mirandize him, after which he decided to go quiet? Have they told you anything more than we've read in the press?
Let me just say, this White House is reluctant to tell you anything at all involving the Detroit bombing or virtually anything involving terrorism. It's impossible to get information out. I've been very critical of them, very critical of John Brennan in the White House and the entire intelligence structure. As best we can determine, it was the Attorney General, either the Attorney General himself or someone just below him, who made that decision to Mirandize. No one sought the input of the Director of National Intelligence, the Director of the National Counterterrorism Center, the FBI. This was a decision made by, and certainly no one asked Janet Napolitano on Homeland Security. This was a decision made by the Attorney General's office, and it's a decision which really, unfortunately, is consistent with administration policy.
All right, Congressman, thanks so much for being here. We'll be following this debate.
Thank you.
We have to take one more break. When we come back, our hits and misses of the week.